Sometimes we think silence is the safest choice. We convince ourselves that keeping quiet protects the people we care about, that it preserves peace, that it prevents chaos. But what happens when that silence becomes a weapon used against us? What happens when the very thing we tried to protect turns into the cage that traps us? This is a story about loyalty, betrayal, and the devastating price of choosing silence when we should have spoken up. It's about discovering that sometimes doing the right thing for others means losing everything for ourselves. And it's about finding the strength to reclaim our voice when the world has already decided who we are. Before we begin this incredible story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Your support means everything to us. My hands were shaking as I stared at the financial report on my desk. The numbers didn't lie, even though I desperately wished they would. It was late Thursday afternoon at Hartwell & Associates, the prestigious consulting firm where I'd worked for 8 years. The office was quieter than usual, most people having left early for the long weekend, but I was still there, doing what I always did, working late, double-checking everything, making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. My name is Catherine Mitchell, and at 36, I'd built a solid reputation as the firm's most reliable senior analyst. I wasn't the flashiest person in the room, and I didn't chase the spotlight like some of my colleagues. But I was thorough, honest, and people trusted me. That trust was everything to me. The report in front of me told a different story about someone I'd trusted completely. Robert Hartwell, the firm's founding partner and the man who'd mentored me since I started as a junior analyst, had been redirecting client funds. Not stealing them outright, that would have been too obvious. No, this was sophisticated. Small percentages here and there, routed through subsidiary accounts, cleverly disguised as administrative fees and consulting charges. Most clients would never notice. The amounts were small enough to avoid immediate detection, but large enough that over 2 years, they added up to nearly $400,000. I felt sick. Robert wasn't just my boss. He'd been my advocate when others doubted me, the person who'd pushed for my promotions, who'd written recommendation letters when I was considering graduate school. His wife Margaret had invited me to their home for holidays when I had nowhere else to go. They'd become like family, to me. And now I was looking at evidence that he'd been lying to everyone for years. I printed the report and slid it into a folder, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? If I reported this to the board, Robert would face criminal charges. His reputation would be destroyed. The firm might collapse. We weren't large enough to survive a scandal like this. 43 people would lose their jobs. Families would be affected. And Margaret had no idea. She'd been battling health issues for the past year, something serious that Robert rarely talked about, but I knew weighed on him constantly. The medical bills alone must have been crushing them. My desk phone rang, making me jump. I took a breath and answered. "Catherine, you're still here?" It was Robert's voice, warm and friendly as always. "I thought you'd left an hour ago." "Just finishing. Up some quarterly reviews," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. Always so dedicated. "Listen, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to discuss the Pemberton account with you before tomorrow's presentation." My stomach tightened. "Of course. I'll come to your office. Actually, why don't we grab coffee downstairs? I could use some fresh air." 10 minutes later, we were sitting in the cafe on the ground floor of our building. Robert looked tired, I noticed. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there a few months ago. His suit, usually impeccable, seemed to hang a bit looser on his frame. "Catherine, I want to thank you," he began, stirring sugar into his coffee. "The work you've been doing lately has been exceptional. The partners have noticed. We're considering you for the director position that's opening up next quarter." The director position. I'd been working toward that for 3 years. "That means a lot, Robert," I managed to say. "You deserve it. You've always had integrity, and that's rare in this business. People can have all the talent in the world, but if they don't have character, they're worthless to me." The irony of his words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. He leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more serious. "I also wanted to talk to you about something else. It's delicate, and I need someone I can trust completely." My heart was pounding. Did he know I'd found something? There's been some unusual activity in a few of the subsidiary accounts. he continued. Small discrepancies that don't quite add up. I've been trying to trace them myself, but I think I need a fresh set of eyes. Someone thorough. Someone who knows how to be discreet. He was asking me to investigate the very thing he'd done. The audacity of it would have been impressive if it wasn't so devastating. Of course, I heard myself say. I'll look into it. I knew I could count on you. But Catherine, this needs to stay between us for now. If there's something wrong, I don't want to cause unnecessary panic. We'll handle it quietly, professionally. That's how we protect everyone. I nodded, unable to speak. That night, I barely slept. I kept running through scenarios in my mind. If I went to the board directly, Robert would know I'd betrayed his trust. He'd built this firm from nothing, and despite what he'd done, part of me still cared about him. More than that, I cared about Margaret, about my colleagues who'd become friends, about the clients who depended on us. But if I stayed silent, I'd be complicit. I'd be protecting a person who'd broken the law, who'd violated the trust of clients who believed in our integrity. By Friday morning, I'd made a decision. I would talk to Robert privately first. I'd give him a chance to explain, maybe even to make things right before anyone else found out. It felt like the compassionate choice, the one that gave him dignity while still addressing the problem. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. I scheduled a meeting with Robert for Monday morning, telling his assistant it was urgent, but not specifying why. The weekend dragged by in a blur of anxiety and second-guessing. I drafted what I would say a dozen times, trying to find words that were firm but kind, clear but not accusatory. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical weather for early March in Chicago. I dressed carefully in my navy suit, the one I wore when I needed to feel confident and professional. I gathered my evidence, organized it neatly in a folder, and rehearsed my opening lines one more time. But when I arrived at the office at 8:30, something was wrong. The atmosphere felt strange, charged with an energy I couldn't quite identify. People were gathered in small groups, speaking in low voices. Several looked up when I walked in, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite read. Jennifer from accounting hurried over to me before I even reached my desk. Catherine, have you heard? Heard what? About the emergency board meeting. It started an hour ago. Robert called it himself over the weekend. My blood ran cold. What's it about? Jennifer glanced around and lowered her voice. Nobody knows exactly, but there are rumors about financial irregularities. Someone apparently found evidence of fund misappropriation and reported it directly to the board chairman on Saturday. The folder in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Who reported it? I asked, though I already knew the answer would change everything. That's the thing. Nobody knows for sure, but people are saying it might have been you. Robert's assistant mentioned that you'd requested an urgent meeting with him for this morning, and then this happened. Catherine, did you find something? Before I could answer, Robert's office door opened. The board members filed out, their faces grim. And then, Robert emerged, looking directly at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of the warmth I'd known for 8 years. He walked straight toward me, and everyone in the office seemed to stop breathing. Catherine, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent floor. The board would like to speak with you. Now. I followed him to the conference room on shaking legs. Inside, the 5 board members sat around the long mahogany table. The chairman, Edward Morrison, gestured to an empty chair across from them. Miss Mitchell, please sit down. I did, clutching my folder like a shield. We've been informed of serious allegations regarding financial misconduct within the firm, Edward began. Mr. Hartwell has brought to our attention that you may have information relevant to this matter. Is that correct? I opened my mouth to speak, but Robert cut in smoothly. I asked Catherine last week to conduct a quiet investigation into some accounting discrepancies I'd noticed. I trusted her discretion. However, over the weekend, I received an anonymous tip suggesting that the irregularities might be more extensive than I initially thought. The evidence points to systematic fund redirection dating back approximately 2 years. He slid several documents across the table. I recognized them. They were the same reports I'd been reviewing, but something about them looked different. What I've discovered, Robert continued, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine regret, is that these transactions were all processed and authorized by someone with senior analyst access, someone who would have had both the knowledge and the system permissions to execute them. My heart stopped. He was framing me. "That's not true," I said, but my voice came out barely above a whisper. Robert looked at me with an expression of profound disappointment. "Catherine, I understand this is difficult. I've been trying to find another explanation. Believe me. But the evidence is clear. Every suspicious transaction has your authorization code attached to it. That's impossible. We've reviewed the system logs," Edward interrupted, his tone cold. "The codes match your assigned credentials. Can you explain that?" I looked down at the documents they'd spread across the table. There, on each one, was my authorization signature. But I'd never seen these forms before in my life. "These are forgeries," I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. "I never authorized any of these transactions. Robert, you know I would never—" "What I know," Robert said quietly, "is that I trusted you with sensitive information. And now I'm faced with evidence that suggests you may have been using your position to steal from our clients. Catherine, I wanted to believe in you. I still want to believe there's some explanation, but the numbers don't lie." The meeting lasted another 30 minutes, but I barely remember most of it. They asked me questions I couldn't answer adequately. They showed me evidence I couldn't dispute because I didn't understand how it existed. And through it all, Robert sat there with the perfect expression of a mentor betrayed by someone he'd believed in. By the time I left that conference room, I was suspended pending a full investigation. They'd frozen my access to the building systems and asked me to surrender my office keys and security badge. I was told not to discuss the matter with any colleagues while the investigation was ongoing. I walked through the office in a daze, aware of everyone watching me, whispering. Jennifer wouldn't meet my eyes. Marcus from IT actually took a step back as I passed his cubicle, as if dishonesty might be contagious. Only Sarah, my closest friend at the firm came up to me as I was packing the few personal items from my desk into a cardboard box. "Catherine, what's happening?" she asked quietly. "This doesn't make sense. You would never—" "I didn't do anything wrong," I told her, but even to my own ears, it sounded weak. I found evidence of fund redirection, and I was going to report it. But someone got ahead of me, someone who had a lot more to lose than I did. Sarah glanced toward Robert's office, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You don't think—" "I don't know what to think anymore," I cut her off. I couldn't drag her into this. I just need to figure out how to prove what really happened. But as I walked out of Hartwell and Associates that morning, carrying my box of belongings and feeling the weight of 43 sets of eyes on my back, I had no idea how I would do that. I had no idea that my decision to stay silent, to try to handle things quietly and compassionately, had given Robert exactly the time and opportunity he needed to destroy me first. The man I'd trusted like family had just made me the scapegoat for his crimes, and I'd walked right into it by choosing silence when I should have screamed the truth from the rooftops. My only thought as I pushed through the building's revolving doors into the cold March rain was a simple one. I should have spoken up immediately. I should have known that protecting him would only teach him how to destroy me. But it was too late now. The silence I'd chosen had already sealed my fate. Or so I thought. The first thing I did when I got home was pour myself a glass of wine with shaking hands. Then I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. My apartment suddenly felt too quiet, too empty, like even the walls were judging me. How had this happened? How had I gone from being one of the firm's most trusted analysts to a suspected criminal in less than 72 hours? I forced myself to think clearly. I needed to understand how Robert had managed to frame me so perfectly. Those authorization codes, my digital signature on documents I'd never seen. It should have been impossible. Our system required biometric verification for high-level transactions. You couldn't just forge someone's credentials unless you had the kind of administrative access that founding partners had. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother in Florida. "Sweetheart, just checking in. How's work? Call me when you have a chance." I couldn't talk to her. Not yet. Not until I figured out what to say. How do you tell your mother that you've been accused of stealing nearly $500,000 from the company where you've built your entire career? Instead, I opened my laptop and started going through every email, every file, Every piece of documentation I had from the past 2 years. There had to be something, some proof that I hadn't authorized those transactions. But as I searched, a terrible realization began to dawn on me. I'd been careful about documentation, yes, but I'd also been trusting. When Robert asked me to look into things quietly, I hadn't kept detailed notes about what I found. I hadn't documented our coffee shop conversation. I hadn't made copies of the original evidence I'd discovered before he asked me to investigate further. I'd trusted him, and that trust had left me completely vulnerable. My phone rang. It was Sarah. "Catherine, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know something," she said without preamble. "After you left, Robert called an all-staff meeting. He told everyone that there's an ongoing investigation into financial misconduct, and that the person responsible has been identified and suspended. He didn't name you specifically, but everyone knows. He made this whole speech about how betrayed he felt, how he'd trusted this person like family, how sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us most. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. He's already controlling the narrative. There's more. Jennifer told me that HR sent out a memo to everyone saying we're not allowed to contact you or discuss the case with anyone outside the firm. They're calling it a matter of protecting the investigation's integrity. But Catherine, they're isolating you. They're making sure nobody hears your side of the story." "Of course they are," I said bitterly. "That was always the plan, wasn't it? Silence me before I can defend myself. What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I need to find a lawyer, I guess. And I need to figure out how to prove that Robert forged those authorizations." "Be careful," Sarah warned. "Robert's already 3 steps ahead. Whatever you do, make sure you have solid evidence before you make any moves." After we hung up, I sat there thinking about Sarah's words. Evidence. That's what I needed. But how do you gather evidence when you've been locked out of the very systems that contain it? I spent the rest of Monday afternoon researching lawyers who specialized in corporate fraud. Most of the top firms in Chicago had consultation fees that made my stomach drop. I had some savings, but if this dragged on, and I suspected it would, I'd burn through them quickly. By Tuesday morning, I'd managed to schedule a consultation with Thomas Brennan, a former prosecutor who'd built a reputation defending white-collar cases. His office was in a modest building in the Loop, nothing like the gleaming high-rise where Hartwell and Associates resided. Thomas was in his late 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to assess everything. He listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Let me make sure I understand," he said when I finished. "You discovered evidence of embezzlement by your mentor, the founding partner of your firm. You didn't immediately report it because you wanted to give him a chance to explain. Before you could confront him, he preemptively reported irregularities to the board and presented evidence that makes you look like the perpetrator." "That's exactly what happened. And you have no documentation of your original findings, no copies of the evidence you discovered." I felt my cheeks burn. "No, I printed one report, but I left it in my desk when they suspended me. I'm sure it's gone by now." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be extremely difficult to fight. Without evidence of your original investigation, it's your word against his. And he's a respected founding partner of a consulting firm with 20 years of reputation behind him. You're a senior analyst who, from the outside looking in, appears to have been caught stealing. But I didn't steal anything. I believe you, but belief isn't evidence. Here's what we're up against. Robert has had time to construct a narrative. He's planted evidence that points to you. He's isolated you from potential witnesses, and he's positioned himself as the victim who trusted the wrong person. It's actually quite sophisticated. So, what do I do? First, we need to understand exactly what evidence they have against you. The firm will likely turn this over to law enforcement soon if they haven't already. We should expect criminal charges to be filed within the next few weeks. When that happens, we'll get to see their case through the discovery process. Criminal charges. The room suddenly felt like it was tilting. I'm afraid so. We're talking about alleged embezzlement of nearly $400,000. That's a serious felony. If convicted, you could face significant prison time. Prison. The word seemed to echo in my head long after Thomas said it. We talked for another hour about strategy, about what to expect, about how much his representation would cost. By the time I left his office, I felt simultaneously relieved to have professional help and terrified about what lay ahead. The next few days blurred together. I couldn't sleep properly. I'd lie awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction I'd had with Robert over the years. Had there been signs I'd missed? Had he been planning this all along? Or had he simply seized an opportunity when I discovered his crimes? On Thursday, I received a certified letter. My suspension had been converted to termination, effective immediately. They cited breach of fiduciary duty and violation of the firm's ethics code. My final paycheck would be deposited within 30 days, minus any amounts owed for benefits and other obligations. 24 years old, I'd started at Hartwell & Associates as a junior analyst. Straight out of graduate school, I'd given them 8 years of my life. And now, with one letter, it was over. I called Thomas immediately. "They're moving fast," he observed. "That's actually concerning. It suggests they're confident in their case and want to close ranks before you can mount any kind of defense. Or before anyone starts asking questions they don't want to answer. Possibly, Miss Mitchell, I need to ask you something. During your time at the firm, did you notice anything else unusual? Any other irregularities or concerns that you reported or should have reported?" I thought about it. Not really. The firm was always run pretty tight. Robert was particular about documentation and compliance. That's actually what made finding the fund redirection so shocking. It was completely out of character for how he operated everywhere else. What? About his personal life? You mentioned his wife has been ill. Do you know any details about that? Not much. Robert kept it private. I know she'd been in and out of treatment for about a year. He never specified what for, but from comments he made, I gathered it was serious and expensive. They don't have children, so I think her care fell entirely on him. Thomas made a note. Medical debt is a common motivator for white-collar crime. It doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. The question is whether we can use that to show motive and opportunity that points away from you. How? If we can demonstrate that Robert had both greater motivation and greater means to commit these crimes than you did, we create reasonable doubt. But we'd need evidence of his financial situation, which won't be easy to obtain. That evening, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I drove to Robert and Margaret's house in Evanston. It was a beautiful, older home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place that spoke of established success and comfortable living. I parked down the street, not even sure what I was doing there. I just needed to see it, I guess, to remind myself that these were real people, not just abstract enemies. Margaret was sick. Robert was desperate. None of that justified what he'd done to me, but it made it somehow more human, more understandable. As I sat there, the front door opened. Robert came out, helping Margaret down the steps. Even from a distance, I could see how frail she looked. She was wearing a headscarf, and she moved slowly, carefully. Robert's hand was gentle on her arm, guiding her to their car with obvious tenderness. For just a moment, I felt a flash of the old affection I'd had for him. This was the Robert I'd known, the devoted husband, the man who'd mentored me, who'd believed in me when others didn't. Then I remembered the cold look in his eyes when he'd presented forged evidence to the board. I remembered him sitting there calmly while my career and reputation were destroyed, and the sympathy evaporated. He'd made his choice. He'd decided that saving himself was worth sacrificing me. There was nothing noble in that. No matter how much I'd wanted to protect him by staying silent, I started my car and drove home, more resolved than I'd been since this nightmare began. I wasn't going to just accept this. I wasn't going to let him win, but I still didn't know how to fight back. Friday afternoon, Sarah called me from a coffee shop near the office during her lunch break. "Catherine, I shouldn't be talking to you, but I had to call. Something weird is happening at the firm." "What do you mean?" "People are acting strange. Yesterday, 2 executives from the board came in and spent hours in closed-door meetings with Robert. Then this morning, 3 of our biggest clients called requesting meetings about their accounts. Robert's been on edge all day, snapping at people, looking stressed. And get this, Margaret showed up at the office this afternoon. I've never seen her there before." She and Robert had this intense conversation in his office with the door closed. When she left, she looked like she'd been crying. My mind raced. "Did you hear anything they said?" "No, but, Catherine, what if she found out? What if she knows what he did?" That could change everything, I said slowly. If Margaret confronts him, if she realizes he's been lying to her too, she might be willing to talk to you, Sarah finished. She might be the witness you need. I can't contact her. If Robert finds out I approached his wife, it'll look like I'm harassing them or trying to intimidate a witness. What if she contacted you? I thought about that. How would that even happen? I don't know. But Catherine, there's something else. One of the junior analysts, Kevin, came to me today. He said he was reviewing some old backup files for a different project and noticed some discrepancies in the authorization logs. He said it looked like several high-level transactions from last year had timestamps that didn't match the system's automatic logs, like someone had manually altered them after the fact. That could be proof of tampering. Could he get me those files? He's scared. He doesn't want to get involved, but he said he'd think about it. After Sarah hung up, I sat with this new information. The fact that other people were starting to notice irregularities was good, but without hard evidence, it was just more suspicion, more questions without answers. I needed something concrete. I needed proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Margaret. What would I do if I were in her position? If I discovered that my husband had not only committed crimes but had also framed someone I'd welcomed into my home, someone I'd treated like family, I'd want to know the truth. And if I were a decent person, I'd want to make it right. But would Margaret see it that way? Or would she stand by Robert, no matter what he'd done? Saturday morning, I got my answer. I was making coffee, still in my pajamas, when my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and froze. Margaret Hartwell was standing in my hallway. I opened the door slowly. Up close, she looked even more fragile than she had from a distance. Her headscarf was a soft blue, and her face was pale but composed. "Margaret," I managed to say, "I'm surprised to see you. May I come in, Catherine? I know I'm probably the last person you want to talk to right now, but I need to speak with you. Please." I stepped aside and let her in. She moved carefully, lowering herself into my couch with obvious effort. I sat across from her, my heart pounding. "I'm going to be direct," Margaret said, her voice quiet but steady. "I know what Robert did. I know about the money he took from the clients, and I know he made it look like you were responsible." The words hung in the air between us. "How long have you known?" I asked. "I found out 3 days ago. I overheard a phone conversation he had with one of the board members. He didn't realize I was home. When I confronted him, he admitted everything. He tried to justify it by saying he did it for me, for my treatment, for our future, as if that made it acceptable." Tears were starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Catherine, I'm so sorry. You've been nothing but kind to us. You've been a good friend to both of us. And Robert repaid that by destroying your career and reputation to save himself. I can't live with that knowledge. I won't." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'll testify to what I know. I'll tell the board, the police, anyone who needs to hear it, that Robert confessed to me. I'll tell them that you're innocent." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Margaret, if you do that, Robert will face serious consequences, criminal charges, probably prison time. Your financial situation will become much worse. You need him." She looked at me with surprising strength in her tired eyes. "I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror. Catherine, I've loved Robert for 23 years, and I still do, but I won't let him ruin an innocent person's life to cover his mistakes. That's not the man I married. And if he's become that person, then I need to accept that I don't know him anymore. This will hurt you." I said softly. "Your treatment, your care, will have to be managed differently. I've made my peace with that. Some things are more important than comfort or security. Doing the right thing is one of them." We sat there for a long moment, and I realized something profound. Margaret was making the choice I should have made from the beginning. She was choosing truth over loyalty, justice over comfort. She was refusing to stay silent, even though it would cost her dearly. She was teaching me what courage actually looked like. "Thank you," I whispered. "You have no idea what this means to me." "I have some idea," she said gently. "And Catherine, I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry that silence and misplaced trust put you in this position, both Robert's and yours." After Margaret left, I called Thomas immediately. When I told him what happened, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "This changes everything," he finally said. "With Margaret's testimony, we have a real case. But Miss Hart Mitchell, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly. Robert won't go down without a fight, and when he realizes his wife is testifying against him, he'll do whatever it takes to discredit her. I understand, but at least now we have a chance." "Yes," Thomas agreed. "Now we have a chance." As I hung up the phone, I looked out my apartment window at the gray Chicago sky. The fight ahead would be brutal. Robert had resources, connections, and a powerful motivation to protect himself. He'd already proven he was willing to destroy me to save his own skin. But now I had something I didn't have before, the truth, and someone brave enough to speak it. The silence I'd chosen at the beginning of this nightmare had nearly destroyed me. But Margaret's courage was teaching me something crucial. Sometimes speaking up, even when it costs you everything, is the only way to find redemption. The real battle was just beginning. But for the first time since this started, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could win. Monday morning arrived with an unexpected development. Thomas called me at 7:30, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Catherine, we have a problem. Robert's lawyers filed a motion this morning accusing you of witness intimidation. They're claiming you contacted Margaret and threatened her in an attempt to coerce false testimony." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "That's completely false. She came to me. I didn't even know she was coming. I believe you, but we need to prove it. Do you have any security cameras in your building? Anything? That would show she arrived at your apartment voluntarily. There's a camera in the main lobby. It should have footage from Saturday morning." "Good. I need you to contact your building manager immediately and request that footage be preserved. Don't wait. Robert's team will be looking for ways to cast doubt on Margaret's credibility. And if we can't prove she came to you willingly, this becomes a he-said-she-said situation that won't help us." I spent the next 2 hours working with my building manager, a patient man named Dennis, who seemed confused by the urgency, but ultimately cooperative. He copied the relevant footage onto a drive and provided a signed statement confirming the timestamp and that the cameras hadn't been tampered with. The footage was clear. It showed Margaret entering the building at 9:14 in the morning, looking around as if checking the EU directory, then walking to the elevator alone. No one accompanied her. No one followed her. She'd come of her own free will. But the damage of Robert's accusation was already spreading. By Tuesday afternoon, Thomas informed me that the board had issued a statement expressing concern about allegations of witness tampering and emphasizing their commitment to a thorough and impartial investigation. "They're not naming you specifically," Thomas explained, "but everyone knows who they're talking about. This is strategic. Robert's trying to poison the well before Margaret can even give her testimony. Can't we release the security footage? Show everyone that it's a lie? Not yet. If we release evidence piecemeal, we lose the impact. We need to present everything together, in the right context, at the right time. For now, we document everything and build our case methodically." But methodical didn't feel like enough when my life was falling apart in real time. Wednesday brought another blow. I received an email from my landlord. Several of my neighbors had complained about suspicious activity and concerns about criminal elements in the building. The email was carefully worded, but the message was clear. They wanted me out. "How does everyone even know what's happening?" I asked Sarah during one of our secret phone calls. "It's not like the firm published my name publicly. You'd be surprised how fast news travels," Sarah said grimly. "People talk. They know people at other firms, at professional organizations. Robert's been having private conversations with key people in the industry. I'm sure of it. He's making sure that even if you're cleared legally, your reputation is so damaged that no one will hire you. That's deliberate career assassination. That's survival. He knows that if you remain credible, you're a threat. So he's systematically destroying your credibility before you can fight back." That night, I made a decision that Thomas had advised against. I started documenting everything publicly. I created a detailed timeline of events, printed copies of every piece of evidence I had access to, and prepared a statement explaining my side of the story. I wasn't going to release it yet, but I was going to be ready. "If Robert can control the narrative," I told Thomas during our Thursday meeting, "then so can I. I'm not going to just sit here and let him destroy me without responding. Catherine, I understand your frustration. but going public before we have Margaret's formal testimony could backfire catastrophically. If you're seen as trying to litigate this in the court of public opinion, it undermines your credibility when we get to actual court. And if I stay silent, I'm letting him write the story of what happened. I've already made that mistake once. I'm not making it again. Thomas studied me carefully. You've changed since we first met. You seem more resolved. I've learned something important. Silence doesn't protect you. It just gives other people the power to define who you are. I'd rather fight and lose than stay quiet and be erased. All right, but if you're going to fight, we do it smart. We wait for the right moment, and we make sure every word you say is legally defensible and backed by evidence. That weekend, Margaret was scheduled to give her deposition to the board's investigative committee. Thomas had arranged for me to provide my own deposition the following week. Everything was building toward a confrontation that would determine whether I had any future at all. On Friday night, Sarah called me with news that made my blood run cold. Catherine, Margaret's in the hospital. She collapsed at home this afternoon. Robert called an ambulance, and she's in intensive care at Northwestern Memorial. What happened? Is she okay? I don't know details, but Catherine, the timing of this, right before her deposition, I cut her off. Don't even suggest what I know you're thinking. Robert might be a lot of things, but he wouldn't hurt Margaret. He loves her. People do terrible things when they're desperate. You know that better than anyone. But I couldn't believe that. Whatever Robert had done to me, I couldn't accept that he would harm his wife. There had to be another explanation. Saturday morning, I did something probably foolish. I went to the hospital. I told myself I just wanted to know if Margaret was okay, to make sure she was receiving proper care. But the truth was more complicated. I needed to see her. I needed to know that the one person brave enough to tell the truth was still able to do so. The intensive care unit was quiet, sterile, filled with the sounds of machines and hushed conversations. I approached the nurse's station carefully. I'm here to visit. Margaret Hartwell. I'm a family friend. The nurse checked her computer. Are you on the approved visitors list? I don't think so, but then I'm sorry, I can't let you see her. Only immediate family and approved visitors are allowed in intensive care. I was turning to leave when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Catherine Mitchell. I should have known you'd show up here. I turned to find Robert standing there, looking haggard and furious. He'd obviously been at the hospital for hours. His shirt was wrinkled, his face unshaven, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and something darker. I just wanted to make sure Margaret was okay, I said quietly. You wanted to make sure your witness was still alive, you mean? That's all she is to you, isn't it? A convenient tool to save yourself? That's not fair. I care about Margaret. I always have. You care about her so much that you're willing to destroy what's left of her life by dragging her into this mess. Do you have any idea what stress does to someone in her condition? The doctors say this episode was triggered by emotional trauma. You did this to her. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I didn't ask her to come to me. She made that choice herself. Because you planted doubt in her mind. Because you're so desperate to avoid responsibility for your own actions that you're willing to manipulate a sick woman into lying for you. People in the waiting area were starting to stare. A security guard had taken notice of the raised voices. I didn't manipulate anyone, I said, keeping my voice level even though my hands were shaking. Margaret came to me because she found out the truth about what you did. She came to me because she's a good person, who couldn't live with watching an innocent person be destroyed by your lies. Innocent? Robert's laugh was bitter and sharp. You're not innocent, Catherine. You're just better at playing the victim than I anticipated. I gave you everything. I mentored you, promoted you, treated you like family. And this is how you repay me, by trying to turn my own wife against me while she's fighting for her life. I'm not the one who committed fraud. I'm not the one who framed someone else to cover my tracks. You did this, Robert. All of it. And the fact that you're trying to blame me for Margaret's condition just proves how far you're willing to go to avoid taking responsibility. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, maybe just exhaustion. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold determination. Stay away from my wife, he said quietly. Stay away from me. Stay away from anyone connected to this firm. If I see you anywhere near Margaret again, I'll file for a restraining order so fast it'll make your head spin. And trust me, Catherine, I have the resources and the credibility to make it stick. The security guard was approaching now, clearly about to intervene. Is everything okay here? He asked, looking between us. Everything's fine, Robert said smoothly, his public persona sliding back into place like a mask. This person was just leaving. Weren't you, Catherine? I wanted to stay. I wanted to demand answers, to force Robert to admit what he'd done. But I could see the security guard's hand resting on his radio, ready to call for backup if needed. Making a scene here would only hurt my case. I hope Margaret recovers quickly, I said to Robert. Then I turned and walked away, feeling his eyes on my back the entire time. When I got home, I called Thomas and told him what happened. That was incredibly risky, he said, though his tone was more concerned than angry. If Robert files a restraining order, it complicates everything. It makes you look like you're harassing him and his wife. I know, but Thomas, what if he's right? What if the stress of all this is what made Margaret sick? What if my silence would have actually protected her? Catherine, listen to me carefully. Margaret made an informed choice as an adult. She decided that telling the truth was more important than avoiding conflict. That's not your responsibility. That's hers. And the fact that she's willing to face consequences for doing the right thing doesn't make those consequences your fault. But if she can't testify now, we'll deal with that. If it happens. For now, we assume she'll recover and be able to give her deposition. We proceed with building the strongest case possible. And you stay away from that hospital, away from Robert, and away from anything that could be construed as interfering with witnesses. The following week dragged by in agonizing slowness. Margaret remained in intensive care. Her deposition was postponed indefinitely, and without her testimony, Thomas explained, our case was significantly weaker. We can present circumstantial evidence, he said during our meeting on Tuesday. We can point out inconsistencies in Robert's story, question why he had greater motive and opportunity than you did. But without Margaret's direct testimony about his confession, it becomes much harder to prove. So we're back where we started. My word against his, and he's the one with credibility and resources. Not entirely. We have the security footage showing Margaret came to you willingly. We have the timeline showing Robert had access and opportunity to forge your authorization codes. We have testimony from Kevin, the junior analyst who noticed the timestamp discrepancies. He's agreed to come forward. It's not nothing, but it's not enough. Thomas didn't answer, which was answer enough. Thursday afternoon, I received a text from an unknown number. This is Margaret. I'm out of intensive care. Can we talk? But not in person. They're watching. I called the number immediately. Margaret answered on the second ring, her voice weak but clear. Catherine, I'm so sorry about what happened. I didn't mean to cause such a crisis. You have nothing to apologize for. How are you feeling? Tired? Scared? But determined. Catherine, I need you to know that what happened to me wasn't your fault. It wasn't stress from our conversation. The doctors found something during the scans they ran when I was admitted. My condition has progressed faster than they expected. This was going to happen regardless of anything else going on. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. Margaret, I'm so sorry. Don't be. Listen to me carefully because I don't know how much time I have before Robert realizes. I'm talking to you. I've written everything down. Everything Robert confessed to me. Every detail I can remember. I've given it to my personal attorney with instructions to release it if anything happens to me or if I become unable to testify. Robert doesn't know about this. My attorney is someone I knew before I married Robert. Someone Robert has never met. She's trustworthy. Margaret, why are you doing all this? You could just stay out of it. Focus on your health, your treatment, because I've spent the last week lying in a hospital bed thinking about my life, about what matters, about what kind of person I want to be in whatever time I have left. And I've realized that if I stay silent about what Robert did, I'm complicit. I'm choosing comfort over justice. I'm choosing my marriage over an innocent person's future. I can't do that. I won't. Her words echoed what I'd been learning these past terrible weeks. Silence wasn't neutral. Silence was a choice, and it was almost always a choice that protected the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. Your attorney, I said. Can my lawyer contact her? Yes. Her name is Diane Foster. I'll text you her information. Catherine, one more thing. Be careful. Robert is desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. He knows his world is falling apart. I don't think he'll hurt anyone physically. but he'll do whatever it takes to protect himself legally and professionally. Watch your back." After we hung up, I forwarded Diane Foster's information to Thomas immediately. Within an hour, he'd contacted her and confirmed that she had Margaret's written statement and was prepared to submit it as evidence when the time came. "This is exactly what we needed," Thomas said. "Even if Margaret can't testify in person due to her health, her written statement, especially one prepared with her attorney and notarized, carries significant legal weight. So we have a real chance now. We have more than a chance. We have a case." But Catherine, Margaret was right about one thing. Robert's going to fight this with everything he has. The next few weeks are going to be brutal. Are you ready for that? I thought. About everything that had happened since that Thursday afternoon when I'd first discovered Robert's crimes. I thought about the choice I'd made to stay silent, to try to protect him, to handle things quietly. I thought about how that silence had nearly destroyed me. And I thought about Margaret, lying in a hospital bed, facing her own mortality, and choosing truth anyway. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm ready," but I wasn't prepared for what came next. Friday morning, Robert held a press conference. He stood in front of Hartwell and Associates with several board members behind him, looking somber and professional in his navy suit. Local business reporters had gathered, cameras rolling. "I'm here today to address serious allegations that have been made against our firm," Robert began. "Several weeks ago, we discovered evidence of systematic embezzlement by a former employee. This individual betrayed the trust we placed in them and violated the confidence of our clients. We immediately reported these crimes to the appropriate authorities and began our own internal investigation." My stomach dropped. He was going public. He was putting my name out there for everyone to see. Recently, this individual has attempted to deflect responsibility by making false accusations against me personally. These accusations have been deeply painful, not only because they're untrue, but because they come from someone I mentored, someone I treated like family. Even more disturbing, this person has attempted to manipulate my wife, who is seriously ill, into providing false testimony on their behalf. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I want to be absolutely clear. These allegations against me are completely baseless. They're the desperate actions of someone facing the consequences of their own choices. My wife has been traumatized by these manipulation attempts, to the point where her health has suffered. I'm speaking publicly today because I believe transparency is essential. This firm has always operated with integrity, and we will continue to do so. Justice will be served." When the press conference ended, my phone started ringing. Reporters. Within an hour, there were 2 local news vans parked outside my apartment building. Thomas called immediately. "Don't talk to anyone. Not a word. This is what we expected. Robert's going on offense. He just told thousands of people that I'm a criminal and a manipulator. How am I supposed to just stay silent? Because anything you say right now will be twisted and used against you. We respond through proper legal channels, with evidence, at the right time. Catherine, I know this is hard, but please trust me." I did trust him, but sitting in my apartment, watching news coverage that painted me as a villain, listening to my phone ring with calls from reporters and former colleagues, and even people I'd known in college who'd seen my name in the news, it was unbearable. This was what rock bottom felt like. Publicly accused, professionally destroyed, legally vulnerable, and completely alone, except for a handful of people who still believed in me. That night, unable to sleep, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote out everything I wanted to say. Every truth, every detail, every piece of evidence I had. I wrote it not for publication or for court, but for myself. I needed to remember that I knew what really happened, even if the rest of the world believed Robert's lies. As I wrote, something became clear to me. This fight wasn't just about proving my innocence anymore. It was about showing that silence in the face of injustice only lets injustice win. It was about demonstrating that speaking truth, even when it costs you everything, is the only way to maintain your integrity. Robert had made his move. He'd played his strongest cards. He'd controlled the narrative perfectly, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed that destroying me publicly would make me give up. He was wrong. The real fight was only just beginning, and I was done being silent. The morning after Robert's press conference, I woke up to find my face on the local news website. The headline read, Former consulting firm analyst accused of embezzlement scheme. They hadn't used my name in the headline, but the article made it abundantly clear who they were talking about. My LinkedIn profile had been flooded with connection requests from journalists and curiosity seekers. My email inbox contained hundreds of messages, most of them cruel. I deleted my social media accounts. All of them. If the world wanted to believe Robert's version of events, I couldn't stop them, but I didn't have to subject myself to watching it happen in real time. Thomas called at 8 o'clock. I know yesterday was rough, but I have some news that might help. Diane Foster, Margaret's attorney, has officially submitted Margaret's written statement to the board's investigative committee. She also sent copies to the district attorney's office and filed it with the court as evidence in anticipation of formal charges being filed against you. What does the statement say? Everything we need. Margaret details the conversation she overheard between Robert and a board member where he discussed the embezzlement. She describes confronting him and his subsequent confession. She explains that he justified his actions by saying the money was for her medical treatment, but that she never authorized or approved of what he did. Most importantly, she states clearly that you had nothing to do with any of it, and that Robert admitted to framing you. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not quite hope, but maybe the possibility of hope. So, what happens now? Now we wait. The board has to review the statement and decide how to proceed. The district attorney's office will conduct their own investigation. This could take weeks, maybe months. But Catherine, Margaret's statement fundamentally changes the case. Robert can't simply dismiss it as lies from a disgruntled former employee. This is his wife, someone with no motive to lie, someone who's actually harmed by telling the truth. Unless Robert finds a way to discredit her, he'll try, but it's much harder than discrediting you. Margaret has no history with the firm, no access to the financial systems, no possible motive for embezzlement herself. She's a credible witness specifically because she has nothing to gain and everything to lose. After I hung up with Thomas, I made myself coffee and tried to figure out what to do with my day. I'd been suspended, then terminated. I had no job to go to, no routine to follow. My savings were dwindling as I paid Thomas's fees and covered my living expenses. I'd applied to dozens of positions in the past 2 weeks, but no one would hire someone currently under investigation for embezzlement. My phone rang again. This time it was Sarah, calling from her personal cell. "Catherine, I shouldn't be calling, but I thought you should know. What's happening here?" Robert came in this morning looking terrible. He called an emergency partners meeting, and according to Jennifer, who overheard part of it, he's trying to convince them to settle this quietly. He's offering to resign from the firm and make a financial contribution to the clients who were affected, but only if the board agrees not to pursue criminal charges and to keep everything confidential. He's trying to buy his, way out. Seems like it. But here's the interesting part. Not all the partners are on board. David Chen apparently stood up and said that if Robert is guilty of fraud and framing an employee, then a quiet resignation isn't sufficient. He said the firm has a moral obligation to clear your name publicly if you're innocent. There was a huge argument. Robert ended up storming out. David Chen. I'd worked with him on several projects over the years. He was tough, but fair. Someone who valued integrity above politics. The fact that he was pushing back against Robert gave me a small spark of hope. "What do you think will happen?" I asked Sarah. "Honestly, I think Robert's losing control of the situation. For years, he was the firm, his reputation, his relationships, his vision. Everything revolved around him. But now people are questioning him. They're looking at the evidence, and they're starting to realize that maybe he's not the person they thought he was." That afternoon, I did something I'd been avoiding. I called my mother in Florida. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Catherine, I was just thinking about you. How's everything going?" I took a breath. "Mom, something's happened. I need to tell you about it." The conversation that followed was one of the, hardest I'd ever had. I explained everything. The discovery of the embezzlement, my decision to stay silent initially, Robert's betrayal, the accusations against me, Margaret's testimony. My mother listened without interrupting, though I could hear her sharp intakes of breath at certain points. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Catherine," she finally said, her voice trembling slightly, "why didn't you tell me sooner? I'm your mother. I should have been there for you through all of this. I didn't want to worry you. And honestly, I was ashamed. I felt like I'd made such terrible choices, trusting the wrong person, staying silent when I should have spoken up immediately. Sweetheart, you tried to do the compassionate thing. You tried to give someone a chance to make things right. That's not something to be ashamed of. What Robert did, framing you, destroying your reputation, that's on him, not you. But if I'd just reported it immediately, then maybe things would have turned out differently, or maybe they would have turned out worse. You can't know. What matters now is that you're fighting back. You're not letting him win. That takes courage. After we hung up, I realized my mother was right. I'd been carrying so much shame about my initial choice to stay silent. So much. Guilt about trusting Robert. But that choice had come from a place of compassion, not weakness. The fact that Robert had exploited that compassion said everything about his character, and nothing about mine. The next few days brought a strange kind of quiet. No new developments, no dramatic revelations, just waiting. Thomas assured me this was normal. Legal processes moved slowly, especially in complex cases involving multiple parties and competing interests. But on Thursday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Kevin, the junior analyst who'd discovered the timestamp discrepancies, reached out to me directly. Miss Mitchell, I hope it's okay that I'm contacting you. I got your email from Sarah. I wanted you to know that I gave my statement to the board yesterday, and I also spoke with someone from the district attorney's office. I showed them the backup files I found, the ones with the altered timestamps. Kevin, thank you. That took a lot of courage. I know you were nervous about getting involved. I was. But then I thought about what would happen if I stayed quiet. If you got convicted of something you didn't do because I was too scared to speak up, I'd never forgive myself. Besides, what Robert did was wrong. Someone has to say that out loud. After we ended the call, I sat quietly, for a moment, thinking about Kevin's words. Someone has to say that out loud. How many times in the past weeks had someone chosen silence because speaking up was risky or uncomfortable? And how many times had that silence allowed injustice to continue? Friday brought the break we'd been waiting for. Thomas called me at noon, his voice animated in a way I'd never heard before. Catherine, the district attorney's office has made a decision. They're not filing charges against you. In fact, they're opening a formal criminal investigation into Robert Hartwell for embezzlement, fraud, and falsifying business records. They've issued a warrant to seize all of his financial records and computer systems. This is happening. I felt tears spring to my eyes. So I'm not going to be arrested? I'm not going to trial? Not as a defendant. You might be called as a witness when they prosecute Robert Mao, but you're clear. The DA reviewed all the evidence, Margaret's statement, Kevin's testimony about the timestamp alterations, the security footage showing Margaret came to you voluntarily, and several other inconsistencies they found in Robert's version of events. They concluded that the evidence points overwhelmingly to Robert as the perpetrator and you as someone he framed. What about the firm? What about my reputation? That's going to take longer to rebuild. But Catherine, this is the first step. Once Robert is formally charged, you'll be able to speak publicly about what happened. We can work on clearing your name in the professional community. It won't be easy or quick, but at least now we have the truth on our side. That evening, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in weeks. Relief, not happiness. The damage was too extensive for that, but relief that at least I wouldn't be going to prison for crimes I didn't commit. Sarah called me later that night. Catherine, did you hear? The news is everywhere. Federal agents showed up at the firm this afternoon with a warrant. They seized Robert's computer, his files, everything. He was escorted out of the building in handcuffs. Everyone saw it. It was surreal. How are people reacting? Shocked. Mostly. Some people still think you're somehow involved, but others are starting to realize they were wrong about you. David Chen sent an email to all staff saying that the firm owes you an apology and that he's personally committed to making things right. It's not much, but it's something. Over the weekend, the story broke publicly. Local news outlets reported that Robert Hartwell, founding partner of Hartwell & Associates, had been arrested on multiple felony charges related to embezzlement and fraud. Several articles mentioned that he had allegedly attempted to frame a former employee for his crimes. My name wasn't used, but anyone who'd followed the initial story knew who they were talking about. The comment sections were mixed. Some people expressed outrage that Robert had been arrested based on testimony from his estranged wife. Others said they'd suspected something was wrong with the original narrative. A few even apologized for rushing to judgment. But the most meaningful message came Monday morning. It was an email from Margaret, sent through her attorney. "Catherine, I wanted you to know that I'm proud of what we've done. Speaking the truth was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most important. Whatever happens to Robert now, he brought it on himself through his own choices. You are innocent, and I'm grateful I could help prove that. I don't know how much longer I have, but I'm at peace knowing I did the right thing in the end. Thank you for your courage in fighting back. It inspired me to find my own courage. Be well, Margaret." I read the email 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Margaret was dying, and yet she'd found the strength to stand up for what was right. She'd sacrificed her marriage, her financial security, and her peace of mind in her final months, because she couldn't live with staying silent about injustice. Tuesday brought another development. The board of Hartwell and Associates issued a formal statement. They acknowledged that their investigation had been flawed, that they'd relied too heavily on Robert's version of events without adequately considering alternative explanations. They stated that I had been wrongfully terminated and that they were prepared to discuss compensation and a public apology. Thomas and I met with the board's attorneys on Wednesday. The meeting was held in a neutral conference room at a downtown hotel. David Chen was there, along with 2 other partners I'd worked with over the years. They looked uncomfortable, embarrassed. "Ms. Mitchell," David began, "on behalf of the board, I want to apologize for what happened to you. We failed in our duty to conduct a thorough and impartial investigation. We allowed personal relationships and assumptions to cloud our judgment. You deserved better from us." It was strange hearing the apology. Part of me wanted to be gracious, to accept it and move on. But another part of me was still angry at how quickly they'd believed the worst about me, how easily they'd thrown away 8 years of loyalty and excellent work based on forged evidence and Robert's manipulations. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully, "but I need you to understand what the past month has been like for me. I lost my job, my reputation, my sense of security. I was treated like a criminal by people I'd worked alongside for years. People I'd considered friends wouldn't even meet my eyes. I was prepared to face prison time for something I didn't do. And apology doesn't undo that harm." "You're absolutely right," David agreed, "which is why we're prepared to offer more than just an apology. We'd like to offer you reinstatement at your former position with full back pay and benefits. Additionally, we're prepared to issue a public statement completely exonerating you and explaining that you were wrongfully accused. And we're offering a settlement of $200,000 in compensation for the damage to your reputation and career." Thomas and I had discussed what to ask for. The settlement was generous, more than we'd expected. But the real question was whether I even wanted to go back to Hartwell and Associates. "I need time to think about the reinstatement," I said. "The settlement and the public statement, yes, but I'm not sure I can work somewhere that treated me the way I was treated. Trust has been broken, and I don't know if it can be repaired." "We understand," David said. "Take whatever time you need. The offer stands." As Thomas and I left the meeting, he turned to me with a slight smile. "You handled that well. You didn't roll over, but you also didn't burn bridges. That's smart. I'm just being honest. I don't know if I can go back there. Every day would be a reminder of what happened. Then don't. Take the settlement. Take the public apology, and use it to rebuild somewhere else. You're 36 years old. You have your whole career ahead of you." That night, I sat in my apartment thinking about the future for the first time in weeks. The criminal investigation of Robert was ongoing. He'd been released on bail but was facing serious charges. His lawyers were negotiating a plea deal, according to Thomas's sources. Margaret was in hospice care, her condition having deteriorated significantly. The firm was in chaos, trying to reassure clients and rebuild trust. And me? I was free, cleared of all accusations, vindicated by evidence and testimony, no longer looking over my shoulder waiting for the next blow to fall. But I wasn't the same person I'd been a month ago, that Catherine had trusted too easily, had believed that staying silent was sometimes the compassionate choice, had thought that protecting others from consequences was more important than standing up for herself. This Catherine knew better. This Catherine understood that silence was never neutral, that speaking truth required courage, but was essential, that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who betray you deepest. This Catherine was stronger. Scarred, yes. Tired, definitely, but stronger. My phone buzzed. With a text from Sarah. "Did you see the news? Robert's lawyers just announced he's pleading guilty to all charges. He's trying to get a reduced sentence by cooperating fully. It's over. Catherine, you won." I stared at the message for a long time. Had I won? Robert was facing prison. Margaret was passing on. The firm I'd dedicated 8 years to was damaged, possibly beyond repair. My reputation was starting to recover, but the stain would never fully disappear. Some people would always wonder if maybe I'd been involved somehow, but I was free. I had the truth on my side, and I'd learned something invaluable about the cost of silence and the necessity of courage. Maybe that was victory enough. I texted Sarah back. "Thank you for everything, for believing in me when almost no one else did, for risking your job to help me. I won't forget it." Her response came quickly. "That's what friends do. Besides, you would have done the same for me. Now go celebrate. You deserve it." But I didn't feel like celebrating. Not yet. There was still one more thing I needed to do. The next morning, I drove to the hospice facility where Margaret was spending her final days. I'd called ahead and spoken with Diane Foster, who assured me that Margaret wanted to see me, and that Robert was not on the approved visitors list. Margaret's room was quiet and filled with afternoon sunlight. She was propped up in bed, looking impossibly frail, but somehow at peace. When she saw me, her face broke into a gentle smile. "Catherine, I'm so glad you came." I sat in the chair beside her bed and took her hand carefully. "I wanted to thank you for everything you did, for your courage." "I should be thanking you," Margaret said softly. "You showed me what integrity looks like. You fought back when it would have been easier to give up. That inspired me to do the same." We talked for an hour, about everything and nothing, about her life before Robert, about her regrets and her hopes, about what it meant to live with purpose, to make choices that aligned with your values, even when they cost you everything. As I was leaving, Margaret squeezed my hand one last time. "Catherine, promise me something. Don't let what Robert did make you cynical. Don't let it keep you from trusting people or building relationships. What happened was about his failures, not yours. You have so much life ahead of you. Live it fully." "I promise," I whispered. 2 days later, Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep. I attended her memorial service, sitting in the back row, watching as people who'd known her shared stories of her kindness, her strength, her quiet courage. Robert wasn't there. He was confined to his home, awaiting sentencing, and the terms of his bail prohibited him from attending. After the service, several people approached me, some to apologize for doubting me, some to share their own stories of times they'd stayed silent when they should have spoken up, some simply to acknowledge that what had happened to me was wrong. I accepted their words with grace, understanding that everyone was trying to make sense of a situation that had shattered their assumptions about someone they'd trusted. A week later, I made my decision about Hartwell and Associates. I informed David Chen that I would accept the settlement and the public apology, but that I would not be returning to the firm. It was time for a fresh start, somewhere without ghosts and complicated history. Thomas helped me draft a brief public statement that was published in the local business journal. "I'm grateful that the truth has been revealed and my name has been cleared. I appreciate the board's acknowledgement of their mistakes and their efforts to make things right. I look forward to the next chapter of my career and my life. Short, dignified, and final." Robert's sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks away. Thomas told me I'd likely be asked to provide a victim impact statement for the court. I'd been thinking about what I wanted to say, but that was still ahead. For now, I was focused on rebuilding. I'd started interviewing with other firms, being honest about what had happened and letting them draw their own conclusions. Some weren't interested, but others saw someone who'd been tested under fire and had come through it with integrity intact. One evening, as I was preparing dinner in my apartment, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. I looked different than I had a month ago. Older, maybe. Definitely more tired, but also more solid somehow. more grounded. I'd survived something that could have destroyed me. I'd been publicly accused, professionally ruined, and personally betrayed by someone I'd trusted like family, and I'd fought back. Not with the same weapons Robert had used, not with lies or manipulation or betrayal, but with truth, with evidence, with the help of people who'd chosen courage over convenience. The fight had cost me dearly, but it had also taught me something essential, that silence in the face of injustice is itself a form of injustice. That speaking truth, even when your voice shakes, is the only way to maintain your integrity. Robert had thought my compassion was weakness. He'd thought my initial silence was permission to destroy me. He'd been wrong. And now, as I stood in my apartment looking at the woman in the mirror, I made myself a promise. I would never stay silent again when silence meant letting someone else control my truth. The worst was over. The battle had been won, but the real victory was still ahead, rebuilding my life, my career, my sense of self, creating something new from the ashes of what Robert had tried to destroy. And this time, I would do it on my own terms, with my voice strong and clear, with no more silence holding me back. 3 months after Robert's arrest, I stood in front of the courthouse on a crisp June morning, prepared to deliver my victim impact statement at his sentencing hearing. Thomas stood beside me, along with Sarah, who'd taken a personal day to be there for support. "You don't have to do this," Thomas reminded me one last time. "The judge has all the information he needs. Your statement is optional." "I know, but I need to say this, not for Robert, but for myself." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was somber and formal. Robert sat at the defense table with his attorneys, looking smaller somehow than I remembered. He'd lost weight, and his expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. When I walked in, he glanced up briefly, but his eyes skittered away before making contact with mine. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, named Judge Patricia Reynolds, reviewed the case file one more time before looking up at the assembled room. "This is the sentencing hearing for Robert James Hartwell, who has pleaded guilty to multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and falsifying business records. Before I announce my decision, I'll hear victim impact statements. Miss Catherine Mitchell, would you like to address the court?" I stood up, my legs steadier than I'd expected. I walked to the podium and took out the statement I'd prepared. Then I set it aside. The words I needed to say weren't written on that paper. "Your Honor, my name is Catherine Mitchell. For 8 years, I worked at Hartwell & Associates, where Robert Hartwell was not just my boss, but my mentor. He guided my career, advocated for my promotions, and welcomed me into his family. When I discovered evidence of his crimes, my first instinct wasn't to report him. It was to protect him. I believed that giving him a chance to explain, to make things right, was the compassionate choice. I paused, looking directly at Robert for the first time. He was staring at his hands. That choice nearly destroyed my life. Instead of using the opportunity to come clean, Robert used it to frame me for his crimes. He forged my authorization codes, planted false evidence, and convinced everyone that I was the thief. When his wife discovered the truth and tried to help me, he attempted to discredit her too. He isolated me, ruined my reputation, and almost sent me to prison for something I didn't do. My voice was steady, clear, no trembling, no tears, just truth. But here's what I've learned through all of this. Robert didn't just steal money from clients. He stole something more valuable from everyone who trusted him. He stole their faith in integrity, their belief that doing the right thing matters. He showed them that the person they admired most was willing to sacrifice anyone to save himself. That's a betrayal that goes beyond any financial crime. I took a breath. I'm not here to ask for a harsh sentence. That's not my place, and honestly, I don't think Robert's punishment should be about revenge, but I do think he needs to understand the full scope of what he did. He didn't just hurt me. He hurt his wife, who spent her final months dealing with his betrayal. He hurt his colleagues who believed in him. He hurt the clients who trusted the firm with their finances. And he hurt everyone who stayed silent when they should have spoken up, because he taught them that silence was safer than truth. I glanced at the judge. "Your Honor, whatever sentence you decide is appropriate, I hope it sends a message that people in positions of power and trust have a special obligation to act with integrity. And when they violate that trust, there must be consequences. Thank you. I returned to my seat, aware of the eyes on me, aware that Robert was finally looking at me with something that might have been regret, or might have been just fear of what came next. Judge Reynolds made some notes, then looked at Robert. Mr. Hartwell, do you wish to address the court before sentencing? Robert stood slowly. His attorney whispered something to him, but Robert shook his head. When he spoke, his voice was rough, as if he hadn't used it much lately. Your Honor, I don't have excuses for what I did. I was desperate. My wife was sick, medical bills were crushing us, and I convinced myself that taking small amounts from client accounts was justified because I needed the money more than they'd notice it missing. I was wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong. He turned slightly, looking in my direction. Catherine, I'm sorry. Those words don't begin to cover what I did to you, but they're all I have. You trusted me, and I betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. I destroyed your career and reputation to save myself. That was cowardly and cruel. You deserved better from me. You deserved the truth from the beginning. It was the first time Robert had publicly acknowledged his guilt regarding what he'd done to me specifically. Part of me had been waiting months to hear those words. Now that I had, they felt oddly hollow. An apology couldn't undo the damage. It couldn't give me back the weeks of terror and shame. It couldn't restore Margaret's final months with her husband, but it was something, an acknowledgement, at least, that what he'd done was wrong. Judge Reynolds reviewed her notes one final time, then delivered her verdict. Mr. Hartwell, you've been convicted of serious crimes that betrayed the trust of your clients, your employees, and your profession. The fact that you were experiencing financial hardship does not excuse your actions. Many people face financial difficulties without resorting to fraud and embezzlement. Furthermore, your attempt to frame Miss Mitchell for your crimes demonstrates a level of calculated malice that cannot be overlooked. Therefore, I'm sentencing you to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You're also ordered to pay full restitution to the affected clients and to Miss Mitchell for damages to her career and reputation. Court is adjourned. 4 years. It seemed like both a long time and not nearly long enough. Robert's shoulders sagged as the bailiff approached to take him into custody. He looked back once more as he was led away, and this time, I held his gaze steadily. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just looked at him with the clear eyes of someone who'd survived his worst and come through stronger. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Thomas had prepared me for this. We'd agreed that I would make a brief statement and then decline to answer questions. I'm grateful that justice has been served, I said to the cameras. This experience taught me that staying silent in the face of wrongdoing only protects those who do wrong. I hope my story encourages others to speak up when they witness injustice, even when speaking up comes at a personal cost. Thank you. Sarah hugged me as we walked away from the reporters. You did it. It's really over. This part is over, I agreed. Now comes the harder part, actually moving forward. That afternoon, I met with representatives from Chen & Partners, a mid-size consulting firm that had emerged from the restructuring of Hartwell & Associates. David Chen had left to form his own company, taking several partners and employees with him. He'd reached out to me 6 weeks earlier with a job offer. We're not Hartwell & Associates anymore, David had told me during our initial conversation. We're building something new, with a culture that values integrity above everything else. What happened to you should never have happened, and I want to make sure our new firm is the kind of place where it couldn't happen. I'd like you to be part of that. This offer was for Director of Compliance and Ethics, a newly created position that would give me authority to implement safeguards and oversight systems. It was a significant step up from my old position, with a salary that reflected both my experience and the damage I'd endured. But more than the title or the money, what attracted me was the mission. David wanted to build a firm where ethical concerns were taken seriously, where whistleblowers were protected, where transparency was valued. He wanted to learn from the disaster of Robert's crimes and create something better. I'm ready to accept your offer, I told David that afternoon. But I have some conditions. I want complete independence in my role. I report directly to the board, not to any individual partner. I want resources to implement real oversight systems. And I want a commitment that anyone who reports ethical, Concerns will be protected, not punished. David smiled. Those aren't conditions, Catherine. Those are exactly the reasons we created this position. You have my commitment, and the board's. When can you start? How about next Monday? We shook hands. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to excitement about the future. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to help create the kind of workplace that should have existed at Hartwell and Associates. A place where my younger self wouldn't have faced the impossible choice between loyalty and integrity. That evening, I visited Margaret's grave. It was in a quiet cemetery outside the city, marked with a simple headstone that read, Margaret Ann Hartwell, 1969-2025. She lived with grace and died with courage. I placed flowers by the stone and sat on the grass nearby, watching the late afternoon. Sunlight filtered through the trees. I wanted you to know that Robert was sentenced today, I said quietly. 4 years, and I got my life back. I start a new job on Monday, one where I can actually make a difference. I think you'd be proud of that. The wind rustled through the leaves, and I imagined it was Margaret's way of agreeing. You saved me, you know, I continued, not just by testifying, but by showing me what real courage looks like. You were dying, and you still chose to do the right thing. You still chose truth over comfort. I'll never forget that. I'll spend the rest of my career trying to live up to the example you set. I sat there for a while longer, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The fight was over. Justice had been served, and I was ready to move forward. But moving forward didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying the lessons forward, using what I'd learned to help others, to build something better from the wreckage of what had been destroyed. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new role at Chen & Partners. I developed comprehensive ethics training for all employees. I created anonymous reporting systems for concerns about misconduct. I worked with the board to implement oversight procedures that would catch irregularities before they could become major problems. But more importantly, I made myself available. I encouraged people to come to me with concerns, no matter how small they seemed. I made it clear that asking questions about ethical issues wasn't weakness or disloyalty. It was exactly what the firm needed. One afternoon, about 2 months into my new job, a young analyst named Rebecca knocked on my office door. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with a folder. Miss Mitchell, do you have a few minutes? I found something in one of the accounts I'm reviewing, and I'm not sure if it's a problem or if I'm just being paranoid. I gestured for her to sit down. Tell me what you found. And Rebecca, there's no such thing as being paranoid when it comes to ethical concerns. If something seems wrong, it's worth investigating. She showed me the documents she'd flagged. They were probably nothing, just some confusing paperwork that could be explained easily. But I took the time to review them carefully with her, to explain what to look for, and to reassure her that bringing concerns forward was exactly what she should do. You did the right thing, I told her as she left. Always trust your instincts, and always speak up. That's how we prevent problems from becoming disasters. After she'd gone, I sat back in my chair, thinking about how far I'd come. 6 months ago, I'd been the one discovering suspicious documents, terrified about what to do with them. I'd made the choice to stay silent initially, to try to handle things quietly, and it had nearly destroyed me. But that experience had taught me something invaluable, that speaking up, even when it's difficult and uncomfortable, is always better than staying silent, that protecting wrongdoers only enables them to hurt more people, that loyalty should never trump integrity. These were the lessons I was passing on now, through my work, through my example, through every conversation with employees who came to me with concerns. One Friday evening, about 4 months after starting at Chen & Partners, I was leaving the office when I ran into Sarah in the lobby. She'd also joined the new firm, accepting a position in project management. Hey, got time for dinner? She asked. There's a new Italian place a few blocks away that's supposed to be amazing. Over pasta and wine, we talked about work, about life, about how strange it was to be building something new after everything that had happened. Do you ever think about what would have changed if you'd made different choices? Sarah asked. Like, if you'd reported Robert immediately instead of trying to handle it. Quietly, I considered the question. I used to torment myself with that. But honestly, I don't know if it would have turned out differently. Robert was desperate and clever. He might have found another way to frame someone. or he might have destroyed evidence before I could present it. What I do know is that the experience taught me something I needed to learn, which is that silence is never neutral. When you stay silent about wrongdoing, you're not protecting people. You're enabling the wrongdoer and abandoning the vulnerable. I won't make that mistake again. Sarah raised her glass. To speaking up, even when it's scary. I clinked my glass against hers. To speaking up, especially when it's scary. As summer turned to fall, my life began to feel normal again. I was good at my job. My colleagues respected me. I'd started dating someone I'd met through a friendie, taking things slowly but enjoying the possibility of connection. I'd even started sleeping through the night without nightmares about courtrooms and accusations. The scars were still there. I was more cautious now about trust, more alert to warning signs of dishonesty or manipulation. But I'd learned to see these not as wounds, but as wisdom, hard-earned lessons that made me better at my job and stronger as a person. One October, afternoon, I received an email from a graduate student at Northwestern University. She was writing her thesis on corporate whistleblowing and its consequences, and she'd read about my case. She wanted to interview me about my experience. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near campus. Her name was Jennifer, and she was earnest and intelligent, clearly passionate about her research. "What made you decide to finally come forward?" she asked. "Even after you realized Robert had framed you, you could have just accepted the settlement and moved on quietly. Why did you fight?" "Because staying silent would have meant accepting his version of who I was," I said. "It would have meant letting him define my story. And I realized that if I did that, I'd lose something more important than my career or my reputation. I'd lose myself." Jennifer nodded, making notes. "In your opinion, what needs to change to make it safer for people to report corporate misconduct?" I thought about this carefully. A lot of things. Better legal protections for whistleblowers, company cultures that value ethical concerns over profit, leaders who model integrity instead of just talking about it. But most importantly, we need to change the narrative around whistleblowing. It shouldn't be seen as disloyalty or troublemaking. It should be recognized as one of the highest forms of organizational citizenship, caring enough about the company's integrity to risk personal consequences to protect it. Is that what you're trying to do in your current role? Exactly. I'm trying to create an environment where the next person who discovers something wrong won't face the impossible choice I faced. They'll know they can speak up, that they'll be protected, and that doing the right thing won't cost them everything. After the interview, I walked around campus for a while, watching students hurry between classes. They were so young, so full of potential and idealism. Some of them would graduate and enter corporate environments where they'd face ethical dilemmas. Some would speak up. Some would stay silent. I hoped that sharing my story might help even one of them choose differently than I initially had, might give them the courage to speak truth to power, even when it was terrifying. That was the real victory, I realized. Not the courtroom vindication or the job title or the financial settlement. The real victory was using what I'd learned to help others avoid the same mistakes, to create systems and cultures where integrity was valued and protected. On a cold December morning, almost exactly 1 year after I'd first discovered Robert's crimes, I stood in front of a conference room full of Chen & Partners employees, leading a training session on ethical decision-making. "Let me tell you a story," I began. "A year ago, I discovered that someone I trusted had been stealing from clients. I had evidence, clear proof of wrongdoing, and I made a choice that nearly destroyed my life. I told them the whole story, not in detail, but enough that they understood what had happened and why. I talked about the choice I'd made to stay silent initially, about the consequences of that choice, and about what I'd learned. I'm not sharing this to elicit sympathy," I said. "I'm sharing it because I want you to understand something crucial. When you discover wrongdoing, staying silent feels like the safe choice. It feels like you're being prudent, or compassionate, or professional. But silence protects wrongdoers and abandons their victims. Silence enables harm to continue." I looked around the room at the faces watching me. Some young analysts just starting their careers. Some seasoned professionals with decades of experience. If you discover something wrong here, I want you to speak up. I want you to trust that you'll be heard and protected. That's what I'm here for. That's why this role exists. So that no one else has to face what I faced. After the training, Several people approached me privately. One woman told me about a concern she'd been afraid to report. Another man thanked me for sharing my story and said it had given him courage to address something he'd been worried about. Each conversation reinforced what I'd learned, that speaking honestly about our failures and our fears creates space for others to do the same. That vulnerability, when channeled appropriately, becomes strength. That evening, I sat in my apartment, a new place I'd moved to a few months earlier, wanting a fresh start without the memories of those terrible weeks, and reflected on the year that had passed. I'd lost so much. The job I'd loved, the mentor I'd trusted, the naive belief that doing good work and being a good person was enough to protect you from injustice. But I'd gained something too. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd known. I'd discovered that speaking truth, even when your voice shakes, is the only way to maintain integrity. I'd found that the people who matter will stand by you, even when the cost is high. And I'd learned that silence, which had once felt like safety, was actually the most dangerous choice of all. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Just saw your interview in that business magazine. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Not just for surviving, but for how you're using what you learned to help others. That's who you've always been." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. My mother was right. I'd survived. More than that, I'd transformed pain into purpose, trauma into teaching, silence into strength. The fight with Robert was over. He was in prison, serving his sentence. The firm that had betrayed me had apologized and compensated me. My name had been cleared, my reputation gradually rebuilding. But the real victory wasn't any of those external validations. The real victory was internal, knowing that I'd faced the worst and come through it without losing my values or my voice, knowing that I'd learned from my mistakes and was using those lessons to create something better. As I looked out my window at the Chicago skyline, my lights twinkling in the winter darkness, I thought about the Catherine who'd first discovered those damning financial reports a year ago, that Catherine had been so afraid of conflict, so committed to protecting others, so convinced that silence was sometimes the kindest option. This Catherine knew better. This Catherine understood that speaking truth was an act of courage, that protecting wrongdoers only enabled more wrong, and that her voice mattered, even when using it came at a terrible cost. I picked up my phone and opened a new document. It was time to write the next chapter, not of what had happened, but of what came next, of the policies I wanted to implement, the trainings I wanted to develop, the culture I wanted to help create. I'd spent a year learning what silence cost. Now I would spend the rest of my career teaching others why speaking up mattered. That was my victory. That was my purpose. And that was how I would honor Margaret's courage and my own hard-won wisdom. The silence was over. The truth had won. And I was finally, truly free.